The woman moved through the frozen forest on all fours, her body low to the ground, muscles coiled with the tension of a predator who had forgotten she was ever anything else. 20 years had stripped away every softness, every trace of the frightened 8-year-old who had been left to die among these trees. Her white blonde hair hung in matted tangles down her back, woven with pine needles and ice crystals that caught the late afternoon sun. Scars covered her arms and legs, some from thorns and branches, others from territorial fights and harsh winters that had tried and failed to kill her. Lyra was 28 years old. She had no name for herself anymore. No words at all. But she had something far more valuable than language. She had survived. 50 wolves moved with her through the snow, their breath creating clouds in the bitter air. They spread out in a formation that would have made any military commander pause with recognition. Flankers on both sides. Scouts ranging ahead. A rear guard watching for threats from behind. And at the center, leading them all, the massive white wolf whose size defied nature and whose ice-blue eyes held an intelligence that went beyond animal instinct. Lyra tracked the elk herd with the same precision she'd used for 2 decades. Her mind worked in patterns and probabilities, in terrain assessment and strategic advantage. She couldn't name these concepts anymore. The words had faded years ago, dissolving like morning mist until only the pure function remained. But the thinking itself had never left. If anything, 20 years without the distraction of language had sharpened her tactical mind to a razor's edge. The elk moved through a narrow ravine 300 yards ahead. Lyra could smell them on the wind, could hear the soft crunch of their hooves in the snow. She looked to the white wolf and made a low sound in her throat. Not quite human, not quite animal. A signal. The white wolf's ears flicked forward in acknowledgement. He understood. He always understood. The pack split without hesitation. 12 wolves broke left, scaling the ravine's western slope. 10 more climbed east. The remaining wolves held position with Lyra and the white wolf, waiting. Patience was the first lesson of survival. Patience and timing. Rush too early and the prey scatters. Wait too long and the opportunity passes. The perfect moment existed in a space measured in heartbeats. Lyra watched the elk, calculating. The wind favored them. The terrain funneled the herd into a natural choke point ahead. The snow was deep enough to slow heavy animals but not wolves. Every advantage assessed. Every weakness identified. She'd been running operations like this since she was 12 years old, coordinating wolf packs with an instinct that felt more like memory than learning. The white wolf huffed softly. Ready. Lyra's muscles tensed. Above them, the flanking teams reached their positions on the ridge. She could feel their readiness in the way only pack knows pack. Connected without words. United by purpose. She exploded forward. The elk herd bolted at the first sound, their survival instincts firing in pure panic. But panic made them predictable. They ran exactly where Lyra knew they would run, straight into the narrow gap between 2 massive boulders. The flanking wolves descended from both sides, cutting off retreat. The rear guard closed in from behind. The elk were trapped in a kill zone they'd created themselves. The white wolf took the lead bull cleanly, his massive jaws closing around the throat with the efficiency of a warrior who'd killed 1,000 times. Other wolves brought down a cow and a younger male. 3 kills, enough to feed the pack for days. No waste, no unnecessary death. Strategic hunting with clear objectives and clean execution. Lyra crouched near the white wolf as he fed, her gray eyes scanning the perimeter out of habit. Always aware, always watching. Threats could come from any direction, and survival meant staying alert even in moments of rest. She'd learned that lesson at 8 years old, in the worst way possible, when the person who should have protected her had walked away and left her screaming in the darkness. She pushed that memory down. Memories were dangerous. They belonged to a world she no longer inhabited, a life lived by a completely different person. The girl who'd been abandoned was gone. The woman who remained knew only pack, hunt, survival. The white wolf finished eating and moved aside, allowing Lyra to approach the kill. She'd earned this position over years of proving herself. Not the first to eat, that honor went to the strongest wolves, but far from last. She tore into the meat with efficient violence, her body craving the protein and fat that would keep her alive through another brutal winter. Around her, the pack fed according to hierarchy, order, structure, rules that made sense because they were built on capability and strength, not arbitrary judgments about worth. Here, nobody cared that she'd been called Omega. That word had no meaning among wolves. Only competence mattered. Only contribution to pack survival. The sun was setting when Lyra noticed the wrongness. It started as a feeling more than anything concrete, a disturbance in the natural rhythm of the forest. Birds had gone quiet in a section of woods to the east. Small animals had fled from an area they normally inhabited. And beneath it all, a scent that didn't belong. Metal, synthetic fabric, human sweat laced with chemical deodorant. The white wolf sensed it too. His massive head lifted, nostrils flaring. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Warning. Around them, the pack went rigid with attention. Every wolf focused on the threat direction. Lyra moved to higher ground, her body automatically seeking tactical advantage. From a rocky outcrop, she could see movement through the trees. Not the clumsy movement of lost hikers or casual hunters. This was different. These humans moved with purpose and training, their formation speaking of military discipline. 8 of them, all male, all wearing tactical gear that would have cost more than most people earned in a year. Ballistic vests, combat boots, helmets with communication equipment attached. They carried weapons that weren't designed for hunting deer. Tranquilizer rifles with high-capacity magazines, net guns, specialized equipment that spoke of a very specific mission. They were hunting her. The leader raised a fist and the team halted immediately. Perfect discipline. Perfect response time. These weren't amateurs. Lyra watched as he pulled out a tablet, studying something on the screen. Probably thermal imaging. Possibly satellite reconnaissance. The technology gap was massive and obvious. But technology had limitations. It couldn't smell the wind direction. Couldn't read the micro-terrain. Couldn't predict how prey would respond based on 2 decades of survival instinct. Lyra dropped from the outcrop and returned to the pack. The white wolf watched her with those 2 intelligent eyes as she began making sounds and gestures, communicating strategy in the wordless language they'd developed together. The pack needed to split, create confusion, make the humans think they were facing random animal behavior instead of organized resistance. The white wolf huffed agreement, and the pack began to move. 20 wolves melted into the forest heading north, creating an obvious trail. 10 more scattered east and west, flanking positions that would allow them to observe and report back. The remaining 20 stayed with Lyra and the white wolf, holding position in defensible terrain. She'd chosen a spot where massive boulders and fallen logs created natural cover. Limited approaches, good sight lines, multiple escape routes. If this turned into a fight, and her instinct screamed it would, she wanted every possible advantage. The extraction team advanced with professional caution. Their point man swept for threats while the others maintained tactical spacing. Good training, expensive training. This wasn't some local sheriff's department. This was federal-level response, maybe military, definitely well-funded. The team leader, a man in his 40s with the weathered face of someone who'd seen combat, raised his hand again. The team froze. He was staring at the ground, at the tracks where the pack had split. Lyra watched him process what he was seeing, watched the exact moment he realized these weren't random animal movements. Captain Hayes, one of his men, spoke quietly into the radio net. These tracks show coordinated separation. They knew we were here. They're organizing a response. Hayes studied the tracks for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the flat certainty of a man stating facts. This isn't normal wolf behavior. Someone's directing them. The target is here and she knows we're coming. Target! The word meant nothing to Lyra, but the tone was clear. They'd come for her specifically. This wasn't random. This was planned, resourced, and executed by people who considered her valuable enough to deploy a team this sophisticated. She made a decision. Instead of waiting for them to find her, She'd make them commit to terrain of her choosing. She stepped into view deliberately, standing on top of a boulder where she'd be impossible to miss. 20 feet away, clear shot for any of their weapons, but also surrounded by her pack, wolves positioned in ways that would make any aggressive move extremely costly. 8 humans and 20 wolves, face to face, both sides evaluating, both sides calculating odds. Hayes stared at her and something shifted in his expression. Not fear exactly. Recognition maybe. Or respect. "Miss," he said, his voice carrying across the space between them. "We're not here to hurt you. We need you to come with us. There are people who want to help you, get you medical attention, reintegrate you into society." Lyra tilted her head, the gesture purely lupin. She understood tone, if not words. Understood that he was trying to project calm and reason. But she could also see the tranquilizer rifles being positioned, the net guns being readied. His words said help. His team's actions said capture. "We know you've been out here a long time," Hayes continued. "We know what happened to you. We're not going to abandon you again, but we need you to trust us. Put down any weapons and come peacefully." The white wolf snarled. Deep. Threatening. Several of the team members flinched, their fingers tightening on triggers. The tension ratcheted higher. Everyone balanced on the edge of violence. Hayes made a small gesture, and 2 of his men raised their tranquilizer rifles. "Miss, this is your last chance. Come willingly or we'll be forced to take you by force. For your own safety." Lyra's lip curled back from her teeth. A very human expression of contempt. She'd heard those words before, or something like them. For your own good. For your own safety. Words people used right before they did something terrible. She made a sound. Not a word. Not a scream. Something between the two. A sound that came from 20 years of communicating with wolves in their own language. A signal. An order. An activation code written in instinct and pack loyalty. The forest exploded with motion. Wolves poured from every direction. Not just the 20 she'd kept close. Not just the 50 from her immediate pack. These were wolves from neighboring territories, from rival packs, from hunting grounds miles away. 70, 80, 100. More kept coming, flooding through the trees like a living tide. Hayes's face went white. "What the hell? Contact! Multiple hostiles, all directions." His team tried to establish a defensive perimeter, but there were too many wolves coming from too many directions. Lyra watched with cold satisfaction as military training collided with overwhelming numbers. The humans were skilled. They were equipped, but they were also surrounded by over 100 wolves responding to a single coordinated command. And that's when Lyra felt it, the cost of what she'd just done. Power had a price. Reaching out to that many wolves, commanding them across that much distance, it pulled something from deep inside her. Something vital. She could feel it draining away, feel her strength bleeding out like water from a cracked vessel. Her vision blurred. Her legs weakened. The world tilted sideways and she fell from the boulder, hitting the ground hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. The white wolf was at her side instantly, his massive body shielding her from view. Around them, the wolves pressed the attack. Not killing. These were professional soldiers, and killing them would bring even more humans with even bigger weapons. But harassing, threatening, making it absolutely clear that staying meant dying. Hayes made the call. Fall back, tactical retreat, move, move, move. The team withdrew in good order, covering each other as they pulled back through the forest. The wolves pursued to the tree line and no further. They weren't stupid. They understood boundaries and strategic objectives. Drive the threat away. Protect the pack. Mission accomplished. But Lyra was dying. She could feel it in the way her heart stuttered, in the way her breathing came in shallow gasps, in the way warmth spread across her face from the blood pouring from her nose. She'd pushed too hard, reached too far, demanded too much from a power she didn't understand and couldn't control. The white wolf pressed against her, making sounds of distress. Around them, the pack circled close, their animal minds recognizing injury even if they couldn't understand what had caused it. Lyra tried to move, tried to stand, but her body refused to obey. Darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. And then the white wolf did something impossible. His body began to change. Fur rippled and receded. Bones cracked and reformed with sounds that shouldn't exist in nature. Muscle and flesh shifted in ways that defied every law of biology. Within seconds, the massive white wolf was gone, and in his place knelt a man. A man who was huge, easily 6.5 feet tall, even crouching. His hair was the same silver white as the wolf's fur, falling past his shoulders in a thick mane. His eyes were the same ice blue, holding the same ancient intelligence. Scars covered his arms and chest, the marks of countless battles. He was naked, completely unconcerned by his lack of clothing, his focus entirely on the woman bleeding out at his feet. Lyra stared up at him with eyes that struggled to focus. Her mind, already shutting down from power exhaustion, couldn't process what she was seeing. The white wolf was human. Had always been human. 20 years of trust and companionship, 20 years of partnership and protection, and she'd never known, never suspected. She tried to move away from him, her survival instinct firing even through the fog of weakness. But her body betrayed her. She managed maybe 3 inches before collapsing again. The man caught her before she could fall completely, his large hands surprisingly gentle. "Easy," he said, and his voice was deep and rough, the voice of someone who hadn't spoken human words in a very long time. "You're safe. I promise you're safe." Lyra made a sound between a snarl and a sob, pure animal terror mixed with betrayal. She tried to fight his hold, but she had no strength left. Nothing remained but fear and confusion, and the growing certainty that she was going to die here, in the arms of a stranger who wore the face of the only friend she'd ever known. "I'm Kyle," the man said, his voice staying low and calm despite her struggles. "I've been protecting you for 20 years. That hasn't changed. That will never change." Lyra thrashed weakly, making sounds of distress that no human throat should be able to produce. Liar. Betrayer. Not pack. Not safe. The thoughts had no words, but the emotions were pure and overwhelming. "I couldn't reveal myself before," Ko continued, not loosening his grip, but not hurting her either. "It's forbidden by ancient law. Kings of my bloodline must spend decades living as true wolves, never shifting, never breaking character. But those men forced my hand. They'll be back with more soldiers, better weapons. You can't fight them alone." King. Bloodline. Ancient law. The words meant nothing to Lyra. But the tone spoke of duty and sacrifice, concepts she understood in her bones even without language to define them. Over Kale's shoulder, Lyra saw the rest of the pack. 20 wolves standing in a loose circle, watching. None of them seemed surprised by the transformation. Their postures showed no alarm, no confusion. They'd known. They'd all known except her. The betrayal was complete. Lyra went limp in Kale's arms. Not from acceptance. Not from trust. From pure exhaustion and the devastating realization that her entire world had been built on a lie. Her eyes closed and darkness pulled her under like a riptide, drowning her in unconsciousness. When awareness returned, she was moving. Strong arms carried her, and the scent was achingly familiar despite everything. The white wolf's musk, even in human form. She kept her eyes closed, listening, gathering information the way she'd learned to do in those first terrible weeks alone in the forest. Multiple footsteps. Many people. Wolves walking upright instead of on 4 legs. Voices speaking in low tones, words that brushed past her understanding like wind through trees. She caught fragments, meanings without definitions. How is she? A woman's voice. Concerned, protective. Unconscious, but stable. That was Kyle. His chest rumbled with the words where her head rested against it. She manifested her power on a massive scale, called every wolf within 5 miles. I've never seen anything like it. Wild speaker! The woman's voice held awe. I thought they were extinct, thought they were myths from the old times. She's real, and she's mine to protect. Silence. Then the woman spoke again, carefully. Your Majesty, she's feral. She's been living as a wolf for 20 years. She can barely understand speech. How can you possibly bring her into Ironwood? The council will never accept her. The council will accept my decision. They always have. This is different, and you know it. She needs specialized care, training, years of rehabilitation maybe. You can't just throw her into pack politics and expect her to survive. Kale's arms tightened slightly around Lyra. Those men came to capture her, Thorn. To cage her. Study her. Maybe weaponize her abilities. I won't allow that. I can't allow that. Thorn. The name triggered something in Lyra's memory. Female. Strong. Authority, but not threat. Beta. Second in command. What will you do with her? Thorn asked. Kale was quiet for several steps. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of something more than decision. Teach her. Help her remember what it means to be human. Give her choices she's never had. Show her that protection doesn't always end in abandonment. The words held layers Lyra's consciousness couldn't quite parse. But the tone spoke of old pain, old wounds that had never properly healed. This man knew about abandonment, knew about betrayal, carried his own scars beneath the visible ones. Lyra's eyes opened. She found herself looking directly into Kale's face, into those ice blue eyes that held too much awareness for simple animal instinct. You're awake, he said softly, not surprised, as if he'd been waiting for this. Good, we're almost there. Lyra looked around. They were still moving through forest, but the trees were different here. The terrain was different. And there were people with them. 30, maybe. All walking upright, despite clearly being wolves in human skin. All moving in coordinated formation that spoke of military training and pack discipline. Warriors. She struggled, wanting down, wanting to run, wanting to escape back to the familiar safety of the wild. If I put you down, will you try to run? Kale asked. Lyra bared her teeth at him, a very clear answer. That's what I thought. His expression remained calm, patient. Listen to me, Lyra. You can't go back to the wild right now. Those soldiers know where your territory is. They'll return with more men, more weapons, better tactics. You're not safe there anymore. Lyra didn't want to understand his words, but somehow meaning pushed through anyway. The tone carried threat assessment and tactical reality. Danger. Pursuit. Nowhere to hide. I'm taking you to my territory, Kale continued. Ironwood. You'll be protected there. Defended. And when the threat is past, if you still want to return to the forest, I'll escort you back myself, I promise. Promise. That word resonated somehow. A concept about trust and commitment in keeping your word. Things Lyra had learned from wolves because humans had taught her the opposite. She stopped struggling. Not because she trusted him. Not because she accepted the situation. But because she was too weak to fight anymore. And because somewhere in the tactical part of her mind, the part that had kept her alive for 2 decades, she recognized truth when she heard it. They emerged from the forest into something that pulled up ancient memories from before Lyra had forgotten how to remember. Structures. Buildings made of wood and stone, built with purpose and permanence. Paths of packed earth worn smooth by countless footsteps. And wolves, hundreds of wolves. But these walked on 2 legs and wore clothing, and looked at her with eyes full of curiosity and speculation. Lyra tried to make herself smaller in Kale's arms, her body instinctively seeking invisibility. Too many. Too much. Too different. Every sense screaming, wrong, wrong, wrong. She's terrified, Thorn said quietly. The woman had fallen into step beside them, her presence somehow managing to be protective without being threatening. I know. Kale's voice was gentle. We'll take her somewhere quiet. No crowds, no overwhelming stimulation. Mira, is the healing room ready? Yes, Your Majesty. An older woman's voice somewhere behind them, kind, soothing, the verbal equivalent of warm fur and safety. I've prepared everything you requested, privacy, quiet, and enough food for a week. They entered a massive building, stone walls that rose 3 stories high. Inside, corridors branched in multiple directions, all looking the same to Lyra's panicked mind. Left. Right. Doors opening and closing. Finally, they entered a room that was mercifully smaller. Fire burning in a hearth. Furs spread across the floor. A bed that looked impossibly soft. Windows that let in natural light. Kale set Lyra down carefully on the furs, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her time to process, time to adjust. She immediately scrambled to the corner farthest from the door, making herself as small as possible. Defensive position, back to the wall, eyes on all possible threats. "I'll leave you to examine her, Mira," Keiko said, "but I'll be right outside if she needs me." "Of course, Your Majesty." The door closed. Footsteps receded, and Lyra was alone with the old woman, who approached with the patient caution of someone who understood exactly how dangerous a cornered animal could be. "Hello, little one," Mira said, staying several feet away, making no move to close the distance. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to make sure you're healthy. Make sure that power you used didn't damage anything important." Lyra watched her with wary eyes, ready to fight, ready to flee, every muscle coiled with tension. Mira settled herself on the floor, her movements stiff with age but her posture unthreatening. "You've been living with wolves for a long time, haven't you? You've forgotten how to be around people. That's all right. We can go slowly. No rush. No pressure." She reached into a bag and pulled out dried meat. The scent hit Lyra's nostrils, and her stomach clenched with sudden hunger. She'd lost the elk meat somewhere during the chaos. Hadn't eaten since before the soldiers came. Mira tossed a piece toward Lyra. Not close enough to invade her space. Just close enough to reach. A offering. A gift with no strings attached. Lyra caught it automatically and ate it in one bite, her body demanding fuel regardless of her mind's resistance. "Good," Mira said, smiling, genuine warmth in the expression. "You must be hungry. The king said you used a great deal of power today. That takes energy to recover from." She tossed another piece of meat, then another, each one bringing her no closer but building something intangible between them. Not trust exactly, but the beginning of acceptance. The recognition that maybe, possibly, this person meant no immediate harm. Over the next hour, Mira earned Lyra's cautious tolerance through food impatience and an absolute respect for boundaries. She asked Lyra to show teeth so she could check for infection, to extend arms so she could examine old scars, to move through basic ranges of motion to ensure nothing was broken or torn. When Mira tried to come closer, tried to examine the burns on Lyra's hands from God knows what old injury, Lyra snarled. A clear warning. A line drawn. "All right," Mira said immediately, backing off without hesitation. "No touching yet. I understand. We'll work up to that." She left food and water within easy reach, placed clean furs near Lyra's corner, made sure the fire was stoked for warmth. Then she departed, closing the door softly behind her, leaving Lyra alone for the first time since the soldiers had shattered her world. Lyra ate mechanically. Her hands shook. Her mind struggled to process everything. The white wolf was human, was a king, had been lying to her for 20 years. Her pack had known and hadn't told her. She had a power she didn't understand and couldn't control. And she was trapped in this place of buildings and humans and wrongness. She curled up in the corner. Ayagarhanka in the corner, wrapping her arms around her knees, and made a sound of distress that was purely animal. Lost. Alone. Everything familiar stripped away. The door opened. Kale entered, still in human form, and Lyra's first instinct was to snarl at him. But he didn't approach. He sat down across the room, his back against the wall, giving her all the space she could want. "I know you don't trust me right now," he said quietly. "I know you feel betrayed, but I want you to understand something." Lyra glared at him, her lips pulled back from her teeth. "I couldn't reveal myself in the wild. It's forbidden by law, older than either of us. Kings of my bloodline spend part of every year living as true wolves. During that time, we cannot shift, cannot break character, cannot be anything but wolf. It's how we stay connected to our animal nature, how we remember that crown and fang aren't so different." The words washed over Lyra, carrying meaning in their tone if not their specific definitions. Duty, obligation, rules that couldn't be broken, even when breaking them might have been kinder. "I found you when you were 8 years in," K.O. continued. His voice stayed level, but something in it suggested old pain, old guilt. "Someone had left you to die. You were crying, terrified, alone. I should have taken you to the nearest pack immediately, but something stopped me. So I carried you to the den instead, and you became pack. 8 years old. Abandoned. The memories tried to surface, but Lyra pushed them down. Couldn't afford to remember. Remembering hurt too much. I watched you grow up, Kale said softly. Watched you forget human words and learn wolf language. Watched you become fierce and strong and wild. Watched you develop tactical instincts that put most of my warriors to shame. And I've been trying to figure out how to bring you back into the human world without destroying who you've become. He leaned his head back against the wall, exhaustion showing in the lines of his face. Those soldiers forced my hand, made me reveal myself before I was ready. Before you were ready. I'm sorry for that. Sorry you had to find out this way. Lyra didn't want to listen. Didn't want to feel anything but anger and betrayal. But his voice was the white wolf's voice, carried the same tones and rhythms she'd learned to trust over 20 years. And that part of her that had bonded to him, that had chosen him as pack, couldn't completely shut him out. You don't have to decide anything right now, Kale said. You don't have to trust me or accept this or accept any of it. But please let me keep you safe. Let me protect you like I've been protecting you for 20 years. And when you're ready, when you feel strong enough, you can choose what you want. Wild or civilized, wolf or human, the choice will be yours. He stood slowly, giving her time to react. When she didn't attack, when she simply watched him with those wary gray eyes, he moved to the door. I'll have food brought 3 times a day. Mira will check on you regularly if you need anything. If you're in danger, just call. I'll hear you. I promise. He left, closing the door with a soft click. And Lyra was alone with her confusion, her fear, and the strange certainty that despite everything, despite the lies and the revelation and the absolute shattering of her reality, that man would keep his word. Wolves understood promises, understood loyalty and protection in pack bonds that transcended individual comfort. And somewhere deep in Lyra's feral mind, in the place where instinct lived and reason couldn't reach, she recognized that KO was pack. Had always been pack. Would always be pack. Even if he wore the wrong skin. The first days were impossibly hard. Lyra refused to wear clothes beyond the simple tunic Mira had left. Refused to sleep in the bed. Refused to speak. She stayed in wolf form whenever exhaustion didn't force her back to human, pacing the perimeter of her room like the caged animal she felt like. Mira visited 3 times a day, always bringing food, always patient. She never forced interaction, never pushed boundaries. Simply existed in the space with Lyra, providing steady presence without demands. Kale came every evening. He'd shift to wolf form and lay down across the room, making no move to approach. Sometimes he'd shift back to human and talk about nothing important. His day, the weather, the pack, never asking for response, never demanding engagement, just being there. On the 5th day, Lyra shifted to human form and didn't shift back. She sat in her corner wrapped in furs, watching Kyle with eyes that had lost some of their wild panic. Calculating, assessing, trying to understand what he was and what he wanted. You stayed human today, Kale observed from his position across the room. That's progress. Lyra made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Her vocal cords felt strange after days of wolf sounds, like trying to use a tool she'd forgotten the proper grip for. Are you trying to talk? Kyle leaned forward slightly, careful not to invade her space. It's all right if you can't remember the words. They'll come back with time. Lyra's throat worked, muscles moving in patterns they hadn't used in 2 decades. Finally, one word emerged, rough as gravel and barely intelligible. Why? Kale understood. Why what? Lyra gestured at him, at herself, at the room. The question too big for her limited vocabulary. Why lie? Why reveal yourself? Why bring me here? Why care? Why did I hide the truth? Kale asked. Lyra nodded. I didn't lie, he said carefully. I couldn't tell you the truth. There's a difference. Lyra glared at him. In wolf culture, there was no difference. Truth was truth. Deception was deception. I know it doesn't feel different to you, Kale said. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to find out that way. I'm sorry I couldn't prepare you. But I'm not sorry I protected you all those years. And I'm not sorry fate brought you into my life. The words carried layers Lyra couldn't quite grasp. But the sincerity was clear. This man believed what he was saying. Believed he'd done the right thing even if the method had been imperfect. Outside, night was falling. Through the window, Lyra could see the first stars emerging, pinpricks of light in the gathering darkness. The same stars she'd slept under for 20 years. The same sky, but everything else had changed. She pulled the furs tighter around herself and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring more confusion, more adjustment, more of this impossible balancing act between who she'd been and who these people wanted her to become. But tonight she was alive. She was safe. And the white wolf, even in his wrong skin, kept watch across the room like he'd kept watch for 20 years. Maybe that was enough, for now. Maybe that would have to be enough. The breakthrough came not through language lessons, but through war. Elder Mira had tried everything. Holding up objects and saying their names slowly, carefully, hoping for repetition. Showing Lyra pictures and waiting for recognition. Writing words in the dirt with sticks. But 20 years of linguistic atrophy couldn't be reversed through vocabulary drills. The pathways in Lyra's brain that connected sound to meaning had withered from disuse, and forcing them open through rote memorization was like trying to rebuild a bridge by staring at the rubble. Thorn changed the approach on the 7th day. The female warrior entered Lyra's room carrying a large leather case. She set it on the floor without ceremony and opened it to reveal something that made Lyra's attention snap into focus. Maps. Detailed topographical maps of the surrounding territories, marked with symbols and notations. Terrain, elevation, water sources, strategic positions. Thorn spread the largest map across the floor and placed small stones on various points. She didn't speak at first, just arranged the stones in patterns that told a story even without words. Blue stones in a cluster, red stones surrounding them, black stones forming the line between. Lyra crept closer despite herself. Her eyes tracked the placement, reading the scenario being constructed. Trapped force, enemy encirclement, defensive line. The tactical situation was clear as daylight. Thorn finally spoke, her voice carrying the clipped efficiency of a military briefing. Blue force here, 20 fighters. Surrounded by red force, 60 fighters. Black line represents fortified position they're trying to reach. How do you break the encirclement? Lyra stared at the map. Her mind, freed from the prison of trying to form words, exploded into motion. She saw the terrain, saw the choke points, saw the vulnerabilities in the red force deployment. Without thinking, she reached out and moved the blue stones. Split them into 3 groups. 2 groups created diversionary attacks on opposite sides of the encirclement, while the third punched through the weakest point in the red line, making straight for the fortified position. Thorn studied the new arrangement. A slow smile spread across her scarred face. Textbook flanking feint. Good. Now this scenario. She reset the stones into a new configuration. Lyra solved it. Then another. And another. Each tactical problem more complex than the last. Ambush scenarios. Defensive positions. Pursuit and evasion. Resource management under siege conditions. Lyra solved them all. Not with words. Not with explanations. With pure tactical instinct refined over 20 years of coordinating wolfpack hunts. The principles were identical. Terrain was terrain. Numbers were numbers. Advantage was advantage. Whether hunting elk or fighting enemies, the mathematics of violence remained constant. Where did you learn this? Thorn asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Lyra struggled to answer. Her mouth opened and closed, sounds emerging that weren't quite speech. Finally, she pointed at herself, then made a gesture that encompassed the forest beyond the walls. She pointed at the map, at the stones, then repeated the forest gesture. Wolves, Thorn said, understanding. You learned this from coordinating wolf hunts. Lyra nodded emphatically, relief flooding through her that someone finally understood. Thorn sat back, reassessing. You've been running guerrilla operations for 20 years. You don't need to learn tactics. You need to learn our language for tactics you already know." She stood and left the room without another word. Lyra remained on the floor staring at the map spread before her. For the first time since being brought to Ironwood, something made sense. Something connected to the person she'd been for 2 decades rather than trying to resurrect the child who'd been abandoned. Thorne returned an hour later with Kael and Elder Mira. All through Iweta carried materials. More maps, wooden models of buildings, figurines representing warriors. They spread everything across the floor and Kael knelt beside Lyra, his massive frame somehow managing not to feel threatening. "New approach, Wudan," he said simply. "We teach you military terminology, words connected to concepts you already master. Flank, perimeter, scout, retreat, position, formation." He pointed to areas on the map as he spoke, his finger tracing movements. Then he'd place figurines and wait for Lyra to demonstrate understanding by moving them correctly. When she did, he'd repeat the word, building connections between sound and action, between terminology and tactical reality. Lyra learned faster than any of them expected. Flank made sense because she'd been executing flanking maneuvers since she was 10 years old. Perimeter was just the defensive circle wolves maintained around their den. Scout was the role she'd performed 1,000 times. The concepts existed perfectly formed in her mind. She just needed labels for them. Within days, her vocabulary expanded from a handful of broken words to functional military language. She couldn't discuss philosophy or emotions, couldn't engage in small talk or casual conversation. But she could say enemy approaching from northeast, or established defensive perimeter, or scouts report all clear. The language of survival and combat stripped of everything except essential communication. Kael watched her progress with something that looked like pride. "You have a gift," he told her one evening as they reviewed the day's training. "Not just the wild speaker ability. Strategic thinking. Tactical assessment. You see terrain the way generals see battlefields." Lyra tilted her head, processing. "Learned. Survival." "No," Kael said firmly. "Lots of people survive. Very few people develop the kind of tactical sophistication you've shown. That's not just survival instinct. That's military genius operating on pure instinct." The words meant little to Lyra, but his tone carried respect, recognition of capability. In wolf packs, that mattered more than any verbal praise. Being seen as competent, as valuable, as essential to pack success. She was starting to understand that maybe, possibly, she could find a place here. Not as the helpless child who needed saving, but as a warrior who brought unique skills to the pack. The understanding shattered on the 14th day when guards brought a prisoner to Kael's war council. Lyra had been attending the councils for 3 days, sitting quietly in the corner, listening more than speaking, learning how decisions were made in civilized packs. The hierarchy was different from wolves, but the underlying structure made sense. Alpha giving orders, Beta executing them, warriors following chain of command, scouts reporting intelligence, healers managing resources. Today's council was interrupted when Thorne entered with 2 guards flanking a broken-looking man. He was perhaps 50 years old, his hair streaked with gray, his face lined with years of hard living and harder regrets. He wore the clothes of a minor pack alpha, but they hung on him like costume, like he was playing a role he no longer believed in. "Caught him at the northern border," Thorne reported to Kael. "Trespassing. Says he's looking for someone." Kael studied the prisoner with cold assessment. "Name. Marcus." The man's voice cracked on his own name. "Marcus of the Ashwood Pack. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to find someone. Or find her grave. Find some kind of closure." "Who are you looking for?" Kael's tone gave nothing away. "My daughter." Marcus swayed slightly, grief and guilt radiating off him in waves. "Lyra, I abandoned her in these woods 20 years ago. Left her to die because I was weak and scared and chose my position over my child. I've spent 2 decades trying to find her remains, to give her proper burial, to apologize to her spirit for what I did." The room went very quiet. Every warrior present turned to look at the corner where Lyra sat frozen in shock. 20 years. She hadn't heard that voice in 20 years. But memory was a strange thing. Some things were forgotten. Some things were merely buried, waiting for the right trigger to excavate them. That voice pulled up images. A small house. A woman who wasn't her mother sneering at her. Strong hands setting her down in the forest. Walking away, not looking back even when she screamed. Kale's eyes found Lyra, a silent question. She gave the smallest nod. Confirmation. Why did you abandon her? Kale asked, his voice taking on an edge that could cut steel. Marcus broke down. 20 years of guilt spilling out in fractured confession. My mate demanded it. Said an Omega daughter was an embarrassment. Said the pack wouldn't respect me with such a weak child. I was young, stupid, desperate to hold my position. So I chose status over blood. Chose wrong. Lost everything anyway. My mate left me. The pack respects me less for being someone who'd abandon his own child. I deserve whatever punishment you see fit. Just let me find her grave first. No grave. Lyra's voice cut through the room like a blade. Marcus's head snapped up. He stared at the corner, at the woman sitting there wrapped in simple clothing, white blonde hair still wild despite attempts to tame it. His face went through a rapid succession of emotions. Confusion, recognition, horror, understanding. Lyra? The word came out strangled. She stood, walked forward. Every warrior in the room tensed, ready to intervene if needed. But Lyra's movements held the controlled precision of a predator closing on prey. Not wild, not emotional, calculated. She stopped 5 feet from Marcus, studied him the way she'd study an enemy's defensive position, looking for weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Found them everywhere. I am Lyra, she said, each word carefully formed. No grave. Survived. Marcus's face crumpled. Oh God, you're alive. You survived out here for 20 years. I hoped you died quickly. That it wasn't prolonged suffering. You taught me fight. Lyra's grammar was simple, but her meaning clear. Before Omega label, taught pack tactics, combat stance, then abandoned. That training saved me. She watched him process the irony. The skills he'd given her before deciding she was worthless had become the foundation of her survival. Lyra, I'm so sorry, She cut him off with a gesture. You made tactical error. Abandoned asset. Lost daughter who became strategic weapon. Wild speaker. Command 200 wolves. Your mistake gave enemy strength. Using military terminology because it created distance. Turned personal betrayal into tactical assessment. Easier that way. Less painful. Please, Marcus begged. Let me make amends. Let me be your father again. Lyra's expression didn't change. You dismissed from my pack 20 years ago. Decision stands. No tactical value in reversal. She turned to Kale. Remove him. Kale nodded to the guards. They hauled Marcus to his feet. He kept trying to speak, to apologize, to bargain for forgiveness. But Lyra had already turned away. The ultimate dismissal in wolf culture. He no longer existed to her. When the door closed behind him, Lyra stood rigid for several heartbeats. Then her legs buckled, and she dropped into the nearest chair. The shaking started in her hands and spread through her entire body. Not weakness. The physical cost of keeping 20 years of buried rage contained behind tactical language. The council members quietly filed out. This wasn't their business. This was something beyond their jurisdiction. Kale remained. He pulled a chair beside Lyra and sat without speaking. Just present. Just there. He didn't offer empty comfort or meaningless platitudes. He simply existed in the space with her, a steady presence while she processed the confrontation. After a long silence, Lyra spoke. Clean execution? Very clean, well handled. Her hands still trembled. She stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. Kale's voice was quiet when he spoke again. I lost my unit 15 years ago. Border wars. 30 men under my command. All dead because I made a tactical error based on bad intelligence. Lyra looked at him, saw the weight he carried in the lines around his eyes. I've spent 15 years telling myself it was just mathematics, just probability, just the cost of command. He paused. But it was also 30 brothers, and mathematics doesn't make that hurt less. Lyra processed this. You carry guilt for correct decision. I carry responsibility for their deaths, correct or not. That's, she searched for words, inefficient, wastes energy. Probably, but it's also human. They sat in silence, two warriors who understood the weight of survival when others fell. The next morning, Thorne burst into the war room where Lyra and Kale were reviewing patrol schedules. Her face carried the expression of someone delivering news that changed everything. Federal agents at the gate, official documentation. They're here for Lyra. The War Council reconvened within minutes. Federal agents entered the Great Hall with the confidence of people who believed legal authority trumped physical force. 6 of them, professional, armed, led by a face Lyra recognized even through the fog of half-remembered trauma. Captain Hayes looked exactly as he had 2 weeks ago. Same tactical gear, same weathered features, same cold assessment in his eyes. But now he carried a leather folder full of official documents stamped with government seals. Alpha Kale, Hayes said formally, I'm here under federal authority to bring Lyra of no registered pack into protective custody. Protective custody, Kale's voice was ice. Interesting term for kidnapping. Not kidnapping. Legal requisition. Miss Lyra is classified as a national security interest. Her abilities represent potential value in search and rescue operations, border patrol coordination, wildlife management. We're offering her training, purpose, the opportunity to serve. You're offering conscription. We're offering opportunities she can't refuse. She was born a U.S. citizen. Legal jurisdiction applies. Thorne stepped forward, dropping a thick file on the table between them. Your orders aren't about training. We intercepted your actual mission parameters. Operation Feral Assets. Black Site Facility. Experimental program testing weaponization of wild speaker abilities. 90% fatality rate in test subjects. Hayes's face remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Confirmation. Thorne continued, her voice hard. You're not here to help her. You're here to burn her out, testing how much power she can channel before her brain hemorrhages. She's not a recruit. She's a lab rat. The room erupted. Warriors surging forward. Federal agents hands dropping to weapons. The situation balanced on a knife edge between diplomacy and violence. Stand down, Kale's command cut through the chaos. Warriors froze. Hayes, explain, now. Hayes assessed the room. Calculated odds. Made a decision. Fine. The truth. Yes, feral assets exist. Yes, it tests limits of wild speaker abilities. But the program has saved lives. Intelligence gathered through wolf networks prevented 3 terrorist attacks. Border Patrol coordination stopped 2 major drug trafficking operations. The benefits outweigh the costs. The cost being human lives. The cost being volunteers who knew the risks. Was Lyra asked to volunteer? Kale's voice dropped to something dangerous. Or were you planning to make that choice for her? Hayes didn't answer, didn't need to. Lyra stood. Every eye turned to her. She walked forward until she stood directly in front of Hayes, close enough to see the calculation in his expression, close enough to smell the gun oil and coffee on his breath. I choose KL, she said clearly. I choose Pack. You leave now. Hayes smiled, not pleasantly. Miss, you don't understand. Federal law? Or I call wolves. All of them. Every pack in 50 miles. You saw what 200 looks like. Want to see what 800 looks like? The smile disappeared. Hayes understood threats spoken in his own language. Force met with superior force. Numbers that overwhelmed training. This isn't over, he said to Kale. Federal government doesn't forget, doesn't forgive. Neither do wolves. Remember that when you decide your next move. Hayes and his team withdrew, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke after fire. When they were gone, the council exploded into argument. Elders panicking about federal retaliation. Warriors demanding immediate fortification. Everyone talking over each other until Kale slammed his hand on the table hard enough to crack wood. Enough, we plan, we prepare, we do not panic. He looked to Thorne. Intelligence. Find everything on feral assets. Personnel. Locations. Funding. Political connections. Find their vulnerabilities. Thorne nodded. Mira, contact sympathetic politicians, journalists, Threat of exposure might buy us time. Mira moved to comply. Warriors, begin fortification protocols, defensive positions, supply stockpiling, assume military response within 3 weeks. The room mobilized, purpose replacing panic. Kale turned to Lyra. What can you do? She moved to the map table, studied the terrain surrounding Ironwood. 50 miles in every direction. Forests, mountains, valleys, hundreds of wolf territories. Establish networks, she said, wolves everywhere. Connect them, organize them, create intelligence grid. No one approaches unseen. How many wolves can you coordinate? Lyra calculated. Wolf packs within range. Territorial boundaries. Communication relay chains. 800, maybe 1,000. Needs training. Needs time. Every warrior in the room stared at her. That wasn't an intelligence network. That was an army. That was surveillance system better than satellites and drones combined. Thorne whistled low. That's the largest operational asset in the region. Wolves see everything, just need organization, connection. Kale made his decision. 3 weeks. We prepare for war, but hope for political solution. Lyra, build your network. Thorne, gather intelligence. Everyone else, fortress, reinforcement. Move. The next 3 weeks transformed Ironwood from settlement into fortress, and Lyra from feral survivor into something entirely new. She spent days in the forest establishing connections with wolf packs. Not just calling them, organizing them, teaching them to relay information through chain of command. Scout packs reporting to regional alphas reporting to Lyra. A biological communications network spanning 50 miles. She tested response time, placed warriors at various locations, and had wolves track them, report their movements, direct other wolves to intercept. The system worked. Within minutes of a threat entering the network, Lyra knew location, numbers, direction of travel. At night, she returned to Ironwood, where Kale drilled warriors in defensive tactics, establishing killing fields, fallback positions, coordinated counterattacks. The fortress transformed, walls reinforced, weapons stockpiled, evacuation routes planned for non-combatants. Lyra and Kale worked together reviewing scenarios, testing plans, finding weaknesses before enemies could exploit them. Their partnership deepened not through romance, but through shared purpose, mutual respect, recognition that they thought alike, saw battles the same way, valued the same principles. Late one night, alone in the war room, surrounded by maps and reports, Kale spoke quietly. You know we might lose this fight. Lyra didn't look up from the patrol schedule she was reviewing. No, fight anyway. Something's worth dying for. You'd risk your life for pack you've known 3 weeks? You risked 20 years living as wolf to atone for unit you lost. I understand sacrifice. Kale studied her. When did you learn to read people? Wolves read pack, humans same, different signals. She'd been watching him, seeing how he carried himself, how he made decisions, the way guilt drove him toward impossible standards, the way he viewed leadership as burden rather than privilege. He wasn't king because he wanted power. He was king because he believed someone had to be responsible. Someone had to carry the weight. You see too much, Kale said, but there was no heat in it. You hide too little. Almost a smile. Fair point. The moment broke when Thorne entered, her face grim. Federal convoy spotted. 50 vehicles. 200 soldiers. At 6 hours. Kale stood. Sound the alarm. Battle stations. This is it. Warriors mobilized with practiced efficiency. Non-combatants evacuated to secure caves in the mountains. Weapons distributed. Defensive positions manned. The fortress prepared for war. Lyra stood on the wall at dawn, eyes closed, connecting to her network. 800 wolves spread across the forest, all waiting, all ready. She could feel them like extensions of her own body. Pack multiplied by 40. An army that answered to her alone. She opened her eyes and found Kale beside her. He'd armored himself in leather and steel, weapons strapped across his body. War gear that had seen use before. That would see use again today. Ready? He asked. Ready? If this goes badly, Won't, we're better tacticians. Lyra, you stayed for your unit even when retreat was smart. I stay for my pack. End discussion. Kale saw himself in her. Same stubborn honor. Same refusal to abandon position even when survival demanded it. He should order her to evacuate. Should protect her the way he'd failed to protect his men 15 years ago. But he'd learned something in those 15 years. You couldn't save people from their own choices. You could only respect those choices and stand beside them. Then we fight together, he said. Combined arms, good tactics. They almost smiled. Dark humor before battle. Warriors who understood that laughter in the face of death was its own form of defiance. The federal convoy appeared on the horizon. 50 vehicles forming up in assault positions. 200 soldiers deploying with military precision. Heavy weapons. Containment equipment. This wasn't a rest operation. This was extermination. Captain Hayes's voice broadcast across loudspeakers. Alpha Kale, surrender the wild speaker. This is your final warning. Kale's response carried across the distance. Come take her. And the battle began. The first assault came from 3 directions simultaneously. A textbook military advance designed to divide defensive focus and identify weak points. Federal forces moved with the disciplined precision of soldiers who trained for exactly this scenario. Armored vehicles provided mobile cover while infantry advanced in staggered formations, each unit covering the other's movement. Professional, lethal, overwhelming. They expected traditional shifter tactics, berserker charges, emotional responses, the kind of animalistic fighting that could be countered with superior firepower and tactical discipline. Instead, they found something entirely different. Ironwood warriors held their positions behind reinforced stone walls. No wild charges, no emotional outbursts. They returned fire with calculated precision, conserving ammunition, targeting officers and communications equipment. Every shot deliberate, every movement part of larger strategy. This wasn't a pack defending territory. This was a military force executing defensive doctrine. Hayes watched from his mobile command center, frustration mounting. They're not fighting like animals. They're fighting like special forces. Who trained them? His second in command studied the battle through binoculars. Looks like conventional defensive tactics. Interlocking fields of fire. Prepared fallback positions. Someone here has real military experience. Find out who, target them. But identifying KL among the defenders proved impossible. He moved between positions, directing fire, adjusting tactics, never staying exposed long enough for enemy marksmen. 20 years of surviving combat taught lessons about staying alive. Thorne commanded the eastern wall, her voice carrying orders that warriors executed without hesitation. Years of drilling created muscle memory. Even under fire, the defensive line held solid. The federal forces probed for weaknesses, tested the northern approach, met withering crossfire from elevated positions, tried the western slope, ran into pre-positioned obstacles that channeled them into killing fields. Every avenue of attack anticipated, every response prepared. Hayes modified his approach. Bring up the heavy weapons. We're not capturing anymore. New objective is elimination of primary target. The words crackled across encrypted radio channels. But Thorne's intelligence team had broken the encryption days ago. Every federal communication was monitored, decoded, analyzed. Thorne heard the order change. Her face went cold. They just authorized lethal force against Lyra. This isn't capture anymore. It's assassination. The news spread through defensive positions. Warriors understood what it meant. The rules had changed. This was now total war. Lyra stood on the central tower, eyes closed, mind stretched across 50 miles of forest. 800 wolves positioned throughout the terrain, watching enemy movements that federal forces thought were hidden. Every flanking maneuver reported. Every repositioning tracked. Hayes's soldiers moved through forest thinking they had concealment. They had nothing. She opened her eyes and called down to Kale. Enemy forces moving through eastern forest. 60 soldiers. Planning flanking attack on our supply depot. Kale processed instantly. Thorne, take 20 warriors. Eastern Forest Intercept. Hit them before they reached the depot. Thorn moved, warriors following. They disappeared into the forest like smoke. 10 minutes later, sounds of combat erupted from that direction. Screams, gunfire, then silence. Thorn's voice on the radio. Threat neutralized. 18 enemy casualties. 2 prisoners. Returning to position. Hayes heard the reports from his surviving forces. Impossible. They couldn't have known we were there. We used thermal camouflage. Electronic countermeasures. How did they track us? His intelligence officer stared at the map. Sir, I think she's using the wolves as surveillance network. Every wolf in this forest is feeding her information. We're not fighting one target. We're fighting integrated intelligence system. Hayes went pale. That's not possible. You can't coordinate that many independent units. The cognitive load alone would. She's doing it. Look at their response times. They know where we are before we get there. Every movement we make is telegraphed to them through biological sensors we can't jam or block. The tactical situation collapsed from challenging to impossible. You couldn't defeat enemy who saw every move you made before you made it. Hayes made his decision. New strategy. We can't capture the target. We can't even approach the fortress while she maintains that network. But we can remove her assets. He reached for a specialized radio. Fire teams. Execute scorched earth protocol. If we can't have the wolves, nobody can. Burn the forest. The order went out. Specialist teams moved to pre-positioned locations carrying accelerant and incendiary devices. Within minutes, fires erupted at 12 points around Ironwood's perimeter. Not natural fires. Chemical fires designed to spread fast and burn hot. The kind of fires that destroyed everything in their path. Smoke rose in massive columns. Animals fled the flames in panic. And 800 wolves suddenly found themselves trapped between advancing fires and federal soldiers waiting to cut down anything that emerged from the burning forest. Lyra felt it through her network. Terror, pain, wolves dying in the flames, others desperately seeking escape routes that didn't exist. The fire spread too fast, moved too intelligently, cut off every safe passage. She opened her eyes, looked at Kyle. He saw the decision forming before she spoke. No, he said flatly. Absolutely not. Wolves trapped, need guidance, need coordination. You guide them from here. You don't go into a burning forest. Lyra shook her head. Connection too weak from distance. Signal degrades. Need proximity. Need to be with them. Lyra, that's suicide. Is necessity. Is duty. She moved toward the tower stairs. Kyle blocked her path. She looked up at him with absolute certainty. You would do same. You stayed with your unit. I stay with my pack. My unit died, all of them. That's not an example to follow. Your unit died fighting. Died with honor. Died knowing their commander stood with them. That matters. Her hand touched his chest briefly. You taught me that. 20 years. Now let me use lesson. Kale wanted to refuse. Wanted to order her confined. Wanted to do anything except watch another person he was responsible for walk towards certain death. But he'd learned 15 years ago that you couldn't save people from their own honor. You could only respect it and hope they survived. Take warriors with you, protection. Warriors needed here, defensive line. I go alone, faster alone. Lyra, she was already moving. Down the stairs, across the courtyard, toward the eastern gate where smoke hung thick in the air and the temperature rose with every step closer to the flames. Thorn tried to intercept her. You can't go out there. It's a death trap. Lyra didn't slow. Wolves dying, my responsibility, my command. I don't abandon pack. She shifted mid-stride, her body flowing into wolf form with practiced ease. Then she was through the gate and into the burning forest before anyone could stop her. The heat hit her like a physical force. Smoke choked the air, making every breath an exercise in controlled panic. Fire surrounded her on 3 sides, a living wall of destruction that crept closer with each passing second. Through it all, 800 wolves screamed for help through the connection only she could hear. Lyra pushed deeper into the inferno. Her mind separated into fragments, each one managing a different wolf pack. Eastern Pack needed to move north, away from the worst of the flames. Western Pack should head for the river, use water as firebreak. Southern Pack was already surrounded, needed emergency extraction through a narrow corridor that was closing fast. She coordinated movements she couldn't see, directing wolves through terrain rendered invisible by smoke, using their senses as her own, feeling their terror as if it was her body burning instead of theirs. The cognitive load was immense, managing 800 separate minds while her own body fought to survive. Every breath seared her lungs. Every heartbeat pounded against her ribs like it wanted to escape. Burns formed on her skin where embers landed. Her fur singed. Her paws blistered on superheated ground. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not while wolves still needed guidance. The Southern Pack broke through their encirclement, following the route she'd mapped through their eyes. 40 wolves streaming towards safety. The Eastern Pack reached high ground where fire couldn't follow as easily. 60 wolves secured. The Western Pack hit the river and dove in, swimming to the far bank. 80 wolves saved. But the fire kept spreading, kept closing, and Lyra was trapped in the center of an inferno with no way out. Her vision dimmed. Smoke inhalation stealing oxygen from her brain. Her legs weakened. Burns covering 30% of her body. She collapsed against a boulder, unable to move further, her consciousness fragmenting as her body shut down from trauma. Through failing awareness, she managed one final push, sent the last wolves towards safety. Confirmed they'd reached clear ground. Then her mind let go and darkness pulled her under. She didn't see Kale abandon his position at the fortress. Didn't hear Thorn shouting at him to stop as he shifted and ran straight into the burning forest. Didn't know that the Alpha King of Ironwood was charging through an inferno to reach her. Kale had made this mistake before. 15 years, he'd stayed in position while his unit died. Followed orders. Maintained tactical discipline. Did everything correctly according to military doctrine. And it had cost him 30 brothers. He wasn't making that mistake again. Fire seared his fur as he ran. Smoke blinded him. Heat blistered his skin. He used memory and instinct to navigate, following the path Lyra would have taken, tracking her scent beneath the overwhelming stench of burning forest. He found her collapsed beside a boulder, unconscious, burns covering her body, shallow breathing that suggested critical damage. Wolves circled her protectively, refusing to abandon their commander even as the fire closed in around them. Kale shifted to human form, scooped Lyra into his arm, shifted back to wolf while holding her, an extremely difficult maneuver that required perfect control. Then he ran. The route out had been consumed by flames. He carved new path, using his larger body to bulldoze through burning underbrush, accepting burns and damage as necessary cost of movement. The wolves followed, trusting his leadership the way they trusted Lyra's. They burst from the forest edge 30 seconds before the corridor collapsed behind them. Kale shifted back to human and collapsed beside Lyra, both of them covered in burns, lungs damaged from smoke, barely conscious. Elder Mira was there instantly with healers. They carried both Kyle and Lyra to the medical facility, treating critical injuries while the battle still raged outside. The federal assault had faltered. Hayes watched his carefully planned operation dissolve into chaos. The forest fires had eliminated his ability to use the terrain for cover. Ironwood's defensive line held solid despite every attempt to break it. And now intelligence reported that the Wild Speaker had somehow evacuated every wolf in the region before succumbing to the flames herself. His forces had taken devastating casualties. 40 soldiers dead, 60 wounded, equipment destroyed, supply lines broken, and he'd accomplished nothing except turning what should have been clinical extraction into military disaster. Hayes called retreat. Federal forces pulled back in disarray, leaving equipment and wounded behind. Ironwood warriors let them go. No pursuit. No needless killing. Objective accomplished. Threat repelled. But victory felt hollow. 15 Ironwood warriors had fallen. The forest would take decades to recover. And their Luna lay in critical condition with injuries that might still prove fatal. Lyra woke 2 days later in the medical facility. Every breath hurt. Every movement sent fire through her nervous system. Burns covered her arms and legs. Smoke damage had scarred her lungs. But she was alive. Elder Lyra sat beside her bed, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. Easy. You nearly died. Smoke inhalation. Second-degree burns covering 40% of your body. Complete physical collapse. You've been unconscious 48 hours. Lyra's voice came out as barely a whisper. Wolves? All survived, every single one, because you got them out. Relief flooded through her. She tried to sit up and pain drove her back down. Kyle? Recovering in the next room, smoke inhalation. Burns on his arms and chest from carrying you out. Stubborn fool went into a burning forest to save you. Lyra processed this. Kale had abandoned his position, his duty, his tactical responsibilities, had risked everything to pull her from the flames. The parallel to his lost unit wasn't lost on her. This time he'd chosen differently. This time he'd refused to let someone else die while he survived. Need to see him. You need to rest. Need to see him. Lyra recognized the tone. This wasn't request. This was requirement. She helped Lyra to her feet, supporting her weight as they moved to the adjacent room. Kale was awake, sitting up despite obvious pain, bandages covering his arms and chest. He saw Lyra and relief transformed his expression. You're alive. You came for me, stupid. You stayed for the wolves, also stupid. Pause. Then simultaneously they said, worth it. The moment broke with something almost like laughter. Two warriors who understood that some things mattered more than survival. Some choices were worth the cost. Thorn entered carrying reports. Hate to interrupt the reunion, but we have developments, good and bad. Talk, Kale ordered. Good news. During the battle, our intelligence team leaked Feral Assets program details to every major media outlet. Public outrage is massive. Federal government under investigation. Senate demanding answers. Captain Hayes has been arrested. The program is shut down. Lyra felt tension she didn't know she'd been carrying release. The immediate threat was gone. Bad news, Thorne continued. Other governments now know wild speakers exist. International intelligence agencies are interested. We've identified 3 separate operations trying to gather information on Lyra. This isn't over. The threat has just expanded beyond federal level. Kale absorbed this, made his decision. Then we make her too visible to disappear. Can't black bag someone the whole world knows about. I'm announcing her as Ironwood's co-alpha. Equal command. The room went silent. Elder Lyra spoke carefully. Your Majesty, she's been here 3 weeks. The Council will never accept. She coordinated the largest defensive operation in our territory's history, led 800 wolves and 300 warriors to victory against federal military assault. If that doesn't earn co-alpha status, nothing does. Thorne nodded slowly. I second the nomination. She's proven capability under fire. That's the only qualification that matters. Kale turned to Lyra. Your choice. You can stay, lead beside me. Or leave, return to pure wild. No pressure. No obligation. Lyra considered. She could walk away. Return to the forest. Live as she'd lived for 20 years. Simple. Uncomplicated. Safe in its familiarity. But she'd learned something in these 3 weeks. Pack wasn't just wolves. Pack was anyone who stood beside you when death came calling. Anyone who valued your life enough to risk their own. Kale had proven that. Thorne had proven that. Even the warriors who'd held the line while she'd been in the forest had proven that. Stay, she said. Lead with you. Partnership. Equal command. Kale extended his hand, the gesture formal despite their injuries. Co-alphas of Ironwood. Agreed? Lyra took his hand. Agreed. They shook. Equals. Partners. Warriors who'd earned their positions through capability rather than birthright. The council meeting that followed was contentious but brief. Elders argued that Lyra lacked experience, lacked social skills, lacked traditional qualifications. But the warriors who'd fought beside her spoke in her defense. The scouts who'd relied on her intelligence network testified to her value. Even the families of those who'd fallen acknowledged that without her coordination, casualties would have been 3 times higher. The vote was unanimous. Lyra became co-alpha of Ironwood, the first person in the territory's history to achieve that rank without being born into alpha bloodline. 6 years passed. Years of building alliances, mediating disputes, training young wild speakers, and transforming Ironwood from isolated territory into the center of a growing coalition. Lyra remained more comfortable in the forest than in council chambers, but she'd learned to navigate both worlds with equal competence. Her partnership with KO deepened into something that transcended simple categories. Not quite romance, though that came eventually, slowly, as two warriors learned to trust each other with vulnerabilities beyond the battlefield. Not quite friendship, though that was part of it. Something earned through fire and blood and 6 years of shared command. When their first child was born, it was less about love and more about legacy. The territories needed to see stability, needed to see that the partnership extended into future generations. What began as political necessity became something else entirely when Lyra held her daughter for the first time and felt the fierce protectiveness that only parents understand. 3 children followed over 6 years. Each one carried pieces of both parents. Tactical minds, wild speaker potential, the ability to move between civilization and wilderness without losing either. On an autumn evening, Lyra stood on Ironwood's eastern wall, watching her children play in the courtyard below. Arya was 5, already showing tactical brilliance as she taught her 3-year-old brother Rowan to read tracks. Baby Ember slept against Lyra's chest in a sling, peaceful in the way only infants could be. Kale joined her, his silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. At 48, he carried his years with the grace of someone who'd finally made peace with his past. Delegation from the Western Territories arrives at sundown, he said. Territorial dispute. They're requesting our mediation. We go together, Lyra said. Her speech had improved over 6 years, but remained characteristically direct. Combined approach works best. Always does. They stood in comfortable silence. Below them, Arya called out excitedly about finding bear tracks. Rowan pointed out that the warriors had changed positions 3 times, suggesting they were watching something in the forest. Both children learning to see patterns, to think tactically, to survive in a world that demanded constant awareness. You ever regret it? Kale asked, choosing this life? Lyra considered the question seriously. No. Have both worlds now. Wild and home. Pack and family. Not choosing is choosing both. That's wisdom. That's survival, same thing. They descended from the wall together as the Western Territories delegation arrived. Another dispute to mediate. Another conflict to prevent. Another day of proving that capability mattered more than birthright, that earned respect carried more weight than inherited authority. Years later, when young shifters came to Ironwood struggling with their dual natures, Lyra would take them into the forest and run with them until exhaustion cleared their minds. Then she'd shift back and speak her truth. You're complete, both wolf and human, both wild and civilized. Don't let anyone tell you to be less than all of what you are. She'd tell them her story. Abandonment, survival, becoming general through necessity and choice. And they'd leave understanding that being torn between 2 worlds meant belonging to both. Late at night, when she curled against Kyl's side in whatever form they'd chosen, Lyra was home. The 8-year-old thrown away had become the woman who commanded armies. The feral survivor had become the leader who prevented wars. Not through destiny, through choice, through sacrifice, through the willingness to stand between her pack and death regardless of cost. They called her the Wild General, the Feral Alpha, the Wolf Speaker, but those were just titles. What mattered was simpler. She was pack, she was warrior, she was leader. She was exactly who she'd chosen to become. And she wouldn't change a single scar.